At this time, Jonathan has asked me to introduce our next speaker, and that's Mr. Bill Chamberlain. Bill is going to tell the story of Major John J. Thelen, who was the co-pilot of Shoo Shoo Baby. So again, we thank Jan for reaching out, and on a mission, she attempted to find the veteran or family representative of each member of the crew and the 2 ground crew members. And through this work and research, was able to introduce new people to the 464th Reunion Committee. Bill Chamberlain and Sherry Robinson, who is here also, is John J. Thalen's daughter. So we're pleased, co-pilot, I'm sorry. So we're pleased to have Bill, and he's going to tell the story about his experiences with Major Thelen and his friendship developed as he learned to understand his experiences and come to respect this veteran. Bill.
Try to get this distance right here. First of all, I'd like to thank any veteran from any war that's here for being here. Any other retired military person who's here, I'd like to thank you.
Try handheld, I think, Bill. It's probably going to work better for you.
Can you hear me okay? Try not to blow your eardrums out. Also, 4 people, veterans, retired public service officers, if there's anyone here like that.
I think you have to hold it. I think you have to hold the mic, Bill.
And
yep, let me help you.
Yep, sorry. Okay. We call these technical details. And any relatives that are here to pay respect for their relatives and members of the service. That's what my thank you is for your service and the time that you put in. Technical details. Also, thanks to Tom Price, Mr. Tudor, as he's struggling, and Mr. Blake for the opportunity to speak here today, because I consider it an opportunity and I'm very, very grateful for it. Sometimes we wait a lifetime to meet a person for a very short period of time, and that person fills a void that we didn't even know existed, that lay dormant for a while, and was just waiting and waiting to be filled. John Thelen was that kind of a person to me. He was one of those people. John was the real deal. And when you lose a discovery like that, it really hurts. Losing John hurt a lot. And this is sort of a memorial to him and the man he was. I was not in the military, so I'm a private pilot. I do now own and fly a very nice Cessna twin engine with a glass cockpit, so the kind of thing that John would have thoroughly enjoyed. And I've loved aviation and being involved for 51 years. I met John at his 90th birthday party. I was asked to do a video of the family and words that were put together for appreciation of his birthday. It was the first time I really met him, his brother, his family. I saw a lot of brotherly humor going on because when I was asked to take the family picture, his brother Charlie said, "I won't be in it unless you can Photoshop my cane out of the picture." I said, "Charlie, it's done." So we got a nice picture like that. And whenever our schedules permitted, John and I went on what I call adventures. I bought him an electric scooter, very fast one, which I learned later was possibly a mistake. We went to 1940 musicals in downtown San Francisco. And it was fun to be there with him and watch him tapping away on the step of that scooter. We went to the Castle Air Museum up near in Lodi, and we went to the Palm Springs Museum on a family trip. And it was just so delightful to be there. Except when we were at the Castle Museum, he was running around looking at all the different planes, and he wanted to particularly see a B-36 Peacemaker. So we went over and saw it. And then he wanted to look at some other planes. I said, okay. And I thought, well, let's do something commemorative. So I went back to the gift shop, buy him a hat, B-24 Liberator on it, and looked really good on him, and so on and so forth. And I'm talking with the lady behind the counter, and she says, oh, that's a nice hat. Who's this for? And I said, well, it's for Major John Thelen. He's out there on a scooter looking at your static displays. And she looks at me, and she says, would you do me a favor? And I said, what? She says, can you slow him down, or we're going to have to give him a speeding ticket? And I go outside, and there's John racing from one plane to the next, and we went from plane to plane to plane as I read him the descriptions, and it was terrific. And I wrote a short note to Sherry later, and I said, it must have been a good day, because when we got back to Applebee's, he ate like a horse. Anyhow, one day John asked me for something that I didn't realize was going to take us up real up close and personal. He said there was a photo of Shoo Shoo Baby on the internet. And since I was kind of a senior nerd, he said, could you find it? And I said, John, if it's on the internet, I'll find it. Don't worry. And I went home to find Shoo Shoo Baby. Excuse me, sometimes it gets tight. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. I found the Shoo Shoo Baby. I found Ed Kofte's book. I found the summary. I found the pictures of the crew. I found the stories. I found the combat. I found the technical stories behind it. The picture that was up there. Look at the nose of it. You'll see nothing but patches. John's plane had so many patches in the side of it, 400 patches, that he had the speed had to be slowed down by 12 miles per hour. It had so many patches on it. When he trained a new pilot, Tom Price, his father, they had to do that. Anyway, I was really shocked. So I go back to John. He's sitting in his chair, and I said, you devil, you set me up, didn't you? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're a real hero. I found everything about this plane. And it's a story that needs to be told sometime. Actually. I got the book, and the book told me everything. Everything and the experiences of the Shoo Shoo Baby. It covered the deaths, the fears, the hopes these men had, the emotions that they went through. Coffee with a guy in the evening, and the next day you have to come back and find out he's gone. Or you have to tell a nurse that he's gone and they were going to be married. The discipline that they had. The picture shows it. The luck. And above all, these men had an incredible faith that was developed through what happened to them. It turned out that John at that time was having some lower extremity pain and was diagnosed as bursitis. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I did the best I could. I thought, oh, that's a lot. And then he had a bad fall in his house. And this was just before we were going to go on a cruise that I had been looking for, unbelievably looking for, to get this man alone on a cruise ship. It turned out that he had a serious internal infection, a bad one. It got worse, and it dawned on me one night when I couldn't sleep that I was losing him. And that didn't feel good at all. To lose this man in my life that I had just discovered him. It hurt. Anyway, John went into a care facility, and that was not good. You all know what a care facility is like, and you know what kind of food they have, I think. Well, I visited John a lot in the early mornings because there was a nice little cafe nearby, and I would stop and pick up dollar pancakes and fresh bananas because that's what he liked. And you couldn't get them in the care facility. The yogurt was horrible. So we did that for a while, and it was fun to be with him and talking to him because I would do some grooming, and then I began reading him excerpts from the book, Tomorrow's Promise. A wonderful book written by Ed Kofke from his notes and then edited and produced by his son, Bruce. John reveled in the readings. And we're talking about it, and he says to me one day, "Oh yeah, I remember that piece of plastic was shot off the plane one time." And I looked at him and I said, "John, piece of plastic?" I said, "An ME-109 blew the bubble off your tail gunner and didn't even have a scratch on him." And he was disciplined enough to take out the ME-109 before he got off the second cannon shot, which would have blown Shoo Shoo Baby out of the plane, right out of the air. And you can't tell me, it was incredible. But then I would laugh with him. He never lost his sense of humor. I'd come in, I'd say, "Hey, the barber from Seville is here for your grooming, but he can't sing." John looked at me, deadpan as ever, and says, "Yeah, but I can't pay." I mean, you fall in love with a guy. And whenever his son came over in Hawaii, it was my purpose in life was to get him up in the morning, get him fed and get him groomed, ready for the visit, and then leave because it was a family visit and there was privacy with it. So, as time went on, though, I kept thinking into my mind, what I'm doing is not good enough. It's good enough for me because I'm really taking advantage of this and learning it, but it's not good enough for John. I don't think so. So I decided that honor guards to me are not something that is terrific after you're dead because you're not there. So I went up to Travis Air Force Base on a cold call, went to the kiosk, I said, "I need to talk to the information officer." She says, "What about?" And I said, "Just get him. I need to talk to him about a veteran." So this Tech Sergeant James Hodgman shows up, big strapping guy. He says, "What do you want?" I give him my report information from the internet, the book, the stack that big, and I said, "Well, let me tell you the story." And I told him John's story. And I said, "All I want is one officer to go visit him in the care center while he's still with us. Can you do that?" I said, "I don't know, it's a hell of a story, but give me some time." 3 days later, he calls me back, gives me a list. "I need this, I need that, give me this, give me that, send it up here, get it right away, da-da-da-da-da." He says, "And by the way," he said, "would a week from this Saturday work, could we come down?" I said, "Who's we?" He said, "Well, we're going to have some officers come down." I said, "How many?" He said, "I don't know, we have 21 of them fighting right now." I said, "Jesus." Anyway, 6 officers showed up. They didn't show up in dress blues. They showed up in their flight fatigue uniforms. They were pilots. They were angels in fatigues, as Sherry wrote very nicely in an email. The surprising thing was, and this is part of the serendipitous things that can happen in your life, is that there was a colonel there, Williams, female pilot, KC-10 tanker pilot. And she goes to John and she says, John, I'm so happy to be here, to meet you, to see you, da-da-da-da. You know, nice looking female pilot. And John says, that's so sweet. She says, you don't understand. My grandmother and my grandfather met at the plant where your plane was built, and they married. And we went on, I said, oh my God, what do we do? The next thing, this other Colonel McDonald shows up. He says, John, I have to tell you, and he's got this book with him, about that wide, that tall, that thick. And he says, I had a crew chief who couldn't be here because apparently he's on deployment somewhere. And he was trying to pull strings to get back in 24 hours, and he couldn't. And he opens his book and he says, I'm here because his grandfather flew a P-38 Lightning cover on your raid on Palestine. How does that happen? How do those connections happen? Because you just want a guy to show up and say, nice to see you. They gave John all these medallions from their different groups. The public service officer, they had one there. He took a lot of pictures. I understand a video was made of it, but I can't find it. I was told the other night that it exists someplace. But the other benefit, the serendipitous thing is, Tech Sergeant James Hodgman then discovered John's brother Charlie, because his niece was there. Charlie was a B-17 pilot, shot down on his third run, and incarcerated as a prisoner of war for almost 2 years. He was in Stalag Luft 3, went to Stalag Luft 7, got liberated by Patton's 4th Army, and then that group goes down the street a mile and a half to the Dachau concentration camp. I don't have to tell you about that, that's pretty disgusting. Anyway, they were close brothers. Charlie was the older one. And they both put in full careers in the United States Air Force. So it was one of the fallouts from it. And a month and a half later, 2 months later, the same crew plus another 3 or 4 pilots went and interviewed Charlie. So both these men, I call them the bomber brothers Thelen. And there's always silence. Most people say that, you know, ask Charlie, why'd you fly the B-17? John flied the B-24, and Charlie looks up, he says, well, I thought the B-24 was an ugly airplane. John looked at him and said, we survived the war, didn't we? You got shot down, didn't you? I had better food, didn't they? These guys were incredible. But the serendipitous connections from making a decision like that when you're involved with veterans who are in an environment that we normally wouldn't choose to go into can occasionally be very cathartic and very rewarding. Koffke's book really points this thing out. And I'll cover that a little bit later in the speech. But as a side issue, in 2007 and 8, I worked for a company called Jet Fleet International. We were a jet fuel distributor, and I was covering airports from San Diego to Seattle. We had a booth at the Reno Air Race every year. One year I'm standing outside, I look across, and there's 4 Tuskegee airmen across the tarmac, standing there in the briefing booth. Now everybody knew where the briefing booth was because they expected John Travolta to show up. I didn't care about John. But I saw these 4 black airmen. So I went over and talked to them. Got their picture, got me a picture taken with them, got one book. One of them was shot down on his 19th mission, and he was a prisoner of war, but we didn't talk very much about that. I just bought his book. It was called Red Tail Captured, Red Tail Free. It turned out later, and I was very stupid, because I could have connected John with one of those Tuskegee airmen who was living in Vallejo, and I blew it before the guy in Vallejo passed away. I didn't pay attention to the details. But the one that survived is Alexander Jefferson. Alex is 97 years old, living in Detroit, Michigan. He'd be here today because he got an invitation, but he had to apologize because he was going to the Reno Air Races. Alex, what are you doing with the Reno Air Races? I do things, you know. Read his book, talked to him. He was shot down in April, May of 1944. Now here's the shocker. He was in the same concentration camp, Stalag Luft 3 and 7, with John's brother, Charlie. And they knew each other. There's a picture on Liberation Day of this little black guy, Tuskegee Airman over the corner, and a whole row of other people over there. And I mean, I have done everything I can to blow that picture up and identify Charlie because I talked to him. He said, yeah, you know, he was with this special group called the B-17 pilots. And they loved the Red Tails. And in Ed's book is a section of the commander coming by to talk to him about that. And he's got a Tennessee Southern drawl. And he says, I'm here to tell y'all that tomorrow y'all gonna see some new airplanes out there, and they're gonna look a little different, but they're not German. They're called P-51 Mustangs. You'll know they're ours because they got red noses and red tails, and they're flown by black pilots. Alex flew P-51 cover for John on the 3rd Palesti raid. How's that for serendipitous activity? And then he's in prison at camp with Charlie's brother. His book is marvelous because he's got pictures, which I need a copy for his daughter, pictures of the camp and the barracks and things like that he's drawn by hand. And then the stories, and the story of Dachau is, you can't read it without coming apart. Anyway, to digress for a minute, just so you understand why this means to me. My grandfather was a career Army officer, but unfortunately he married late in life. So I was 2 years old when he died in 1945, 46. But he was one of the non-commissioned officers that helped organize the Army Signal Corps, which became the Army Air Corps, which became the United States Air Force. And he had a very colorful career, believe me, horses and planes and stuff like that. It's quite a story. His letters gave me a precious insight into his life because he wrote letters like Ed's diary, only he wrote these letters to my grandmother almost every day. And when he was in San Francisco in the early 1900s doing his reserve duty, kind of pissed me off a little bit because he flew around the Bay Area in a Jenny before the Golden Gate Bridge. He had a lieutenant that would fly him all over the place when he was up there in a Jenny. I mean, you know, we had an air base up there on a place called the Marina. But the fabulous letter was, he writes one day, he said, well, tomorrow we're going out to do an inspection of Alcatraz. Now, Alcatraz at the time was an Army detention facility. So he goes out there, and I'm with my brother, leafing through the letters. We're driving down to Fort Huachuca, and I find the one, and I read it, and it's a beautiful letter. He's sending all kinds of love to my mother. He says, by the way, I said, I want to comment that these young whippersnappers ought to be happy. They're in the finest Army prison camp in the United States, Alcatraz. I don't think Al Capone thought that. But he was quite a man, and it was his correspondence that taught me to learn to pay attention to what people write about their experience in the military and sometimes in a war, in combat, and the questions that come up. Because he was involved in the provisions development at Botanic Brigador. He never accepted it, as he called the rock would fall. So the question is, what can all this mean? And why am I here today? It's a good question. The answer for me is that I don't want to lose the memories of John and have them fade away. I want his legacy somehow to be touched, or to touch a lot of people, because there's so much in it. And even though the book covers a lot of stuff on the crew on the plane, it's a story of what these 19, 20 to 21-year-old men were going through. You don't see that today. It just doesn't happen. And getting people connected with that more than just aware of it, by seeing, talking, speaking, doing things with the people, to me is very important. John went on to have a successful life. He had a wonderful wife in Chloe. Chloe passed away. He had a second wife named Jewel. He had a daughter and a son, Sherry, Collier, grandchild named Ryan, 2 grandchildren, Mia and Frankie. And hopefully, through the information, they'll somehow stay connected to John, who he was and what he did, because it's a fact that today we have so many changes going on in things. Technology, finances, products, aviation, wars. So many wars today. Communications and public policy. That's not an excuse to go back in time, because we all have to stop and think that all the things that changed and new were available and affecting John, and a young man at his age. And you get inside that a little bit, and you realize that he and Ed Covey experienced their form of change in what was going on at their time. But as I read the book, as I read my grandfather's letters, as I thought about the things that John and I talked about, his care center, the 2 key ingredients that come about was what doesn't change is a human moral compass and a human moral code. It transcends just about everything. And that, to me, just jumped out, because Ed's book, I'll explain that later, is written by a man who was writing in his diary to children that he hadn't had yet. So in case he didn't make it or survive, all this information would be in there. And that's what it was about. It was faith and survival. His expressions are there: emotions, losses, frustrations, fears. Humor, and some conditions. There's a section in there about the thing, it's got a title, it's called Boiled Placenta. You can't read it and not start laughing hysterically at the joke that they pulled on each other over that. The humor was, why? It's okay, I got one goal there was to survive. And that this particular book is the most complete book I've ever written about aviation in war. And it's about their feelings in that before the war, during the combat, and after, with what we now call PTSD. And it's documented in the book. The details of plane mission in there. Now, there's one thing I'd like to do, maybe you don't mind. I know I got a signal here, I got 5 more minutes, but who cares? Page 290 of the book. When I read it, I was riveted, as well as everything else. It says, this is Ed in the diary, I'm not going to end up a psycho or a dead hero. I'll continue to pray myself through the missions with the honest to God prayers. That's the only thing that explains why we are still alive. We are still wondering why we didn't crash when we were shot down over Wienendorf, or when the fuel tanks were shot through on the last Ploesti mission, or why I didn't get blown out of my turret when that German cannon blew it off, or why wasn't Shoemaker's skin even touched when the shrapnel went through the baby, hit his arm, and sliced through the entire arm of his jacket? Why didn't Frank fall through the Bombay doors when we were on fire and diving towards Earth? That was the picture you saw. Why hasn't anyone in our ship gotten even a nick by one of the thousands of machine gun bullets shot at us so far? Not to mention the thousands of exploding anti-aircraft shells, sending us untold number of shrapnel pieces through the baby. It must be God. It has to be. Maybe one day I'll know the answer to why we're alive while others aren't. Or perhaps I won't in this lifetime. This is a 19-year-old tail gunner writing about these things. And on that picture you saw, I think it ties together with this. It says, we followed the third ship onto the runway and began to pick up speed. I held my hands out with my palms up, shouting, "Get up! Get up!" This plane had been shot up and put together overnight. The wheels rose off the ground and then came down again. I shouted, "Up, up, 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 higher, shoe, higher." Maker. I used one hand and waved to the chaplain when we flashed by. I was surprised to see him holding his hands the same way. I turned around and Bill, Sil, and Walt, the other crew members and gunners, we made it over the abutment. All their hands were clasped in a position of prayer. Now, that's what you have that went on. They had a mission one time which is really bad. This takes 60 seconds. And they were all shot up. I think this was the same thing the picture's about. They dived down through. They were limping back, and they were saying, "We made it." And Bill Shoemaker gets on the intercom and says, "No, we're not home free yet. Pay attention, keep alert, keep your eyes peeled out. I have a daughter that I want to get back to in the United States." And this voice comes up from somewhere in the ship and says, "Yes, Daddy." That's the way the crew was. There wasn't anything you could do about that. Now, what I've prepared in closing here is the book. By the way, if you get the book, I can't help this. Page 265 is a story in there about Ed after he left the service. He's in Florida. He's running an appliance store. Washers, dryers, so on and so forth. He comes home early one day from work. He's in his kitchen. And he hears this horrible scream next door from this kid, young man next door. He looks out, and his arm has been cut. And it must have been an artery because the blood is just gushing out, as he described, like it was out of a fire hose. Ed's military service kicked in, because you all may not know, but there's medic training is given to gunners a lot. He goes down the steps, leaps over a 6 to 7 foot thorny hedge, whips his belt out, and puts a tourniquet on this kid's arm. Stops the blooding, and calls a trooper. Now they're kind of out in a rural area, so it takes a trooper 20 minutes to get there. And then he's got to go another 15 miles to the hospital where the boy gets a transfusion and he's saved. The next day, the newspaper puts a report out. Boy saved by trooper with tourniquet, speedy activity, da-da-da-da. Goes through an article in there, giving the trooper all the credit. Bruce, who's 10 years old at the time, or 11, goes to his dad, Ed, and says, "Dad, you saved his life. How do you feel about that?" I'm paraphrasing because it's just a longer paragraph that I have time to read. Ed says, "If I survive the war, be alive to save that boy's life, that's enough for me." How do you compute something like that? You can't. That was Ed Coffey. Now the books, I brought about 35 or 36 books left now. There's a letter in there from General Marsh III, who was the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Air Force in 2015 in Washington, D.C. And he wrote me a nice letter about John Thelen, our Air Force, Tech Sergeant Hoffman, but he also commented in there that the Palesti Raiders, as they were known in the Air Force, are the ones that are part of a special course that they teach at the Air Force Academy in Colorado on courage and determination. And I put a copy of that letter in every book, because I think that's the kind of stuff that is so serendipitous. He was a poet. He didn't know what he wrote. He wrote next to the letter in there. He says, "I promise tonight I will read tomorrow's promise." Jesus. I mean, that's kind of a poetic thing. Anyway, the books are over at the 464 Bombgroup room.
Chick 1.
Pardon me?
Room Chick 1.
Room Chick 1. They're free for any veteran that will go over there and pick up a copy of the book. It may look thick, but by God, it's worth reading. There's a lot of information here about the plane and everything that you saw. And you'll never put it down once you start reading about the combat missions and the humor that went on. And I found so many places in there where John just jumped out. He and Bill created probably the most disciplined, well-trained crew that anybody that I could think of. And the other night I had a wonderful conversation with Mr. Tom Price. And he told me how when he had to turn the plane over, I think it's Tom's dad, that he really put him through the grill to make sure that Mr. Price, Captain Price, would know what kind of a crew he had. And this crew was saved from going on other planes with less competent pilots than Bill Shoemaker and John Thelen. In fact, they had a little coordinator named Tudor, who's mentioned in the book. And he would make sure that these crew members could not be reassigned if they had to another airplane, because they worked so well together. And the stories, I could spend the next 2 days talking about the stories, but I won't, because my time is up. Now, with that said, I picked up a few buzzwords. So right now what I have to do is say my mission is over. We have to rally right. And our next speaker is Hughes Glettenberg. Huh?